We screamed into space and heard the echo. Part 9, Mortals. 2532, Amy's apartment, in devastation. Make sure that one doesn't move, Gerald. Amy woke up to chaos in a teacup, where the cup was her tiny apartment that had suddenly filled with far too many people for her liking. She was lying face down on the ground, pinned by someone very big and strong. To make matters worse, her head throbbed in strange places where the VR headset had been forcibly yanked off her. To say that she was unhappy was an understatement. Her face must have been purple not from injuries, but from anger as she tried to look over her own shoulder at the insolent piece of a canid. Amy stopped struggling, her cheek firmly pressed into the carpet as she glared at the canid sitting on her back. Screaming at the wolfman would be useless. Instead, she looked at the one that controlled the oversized lapdog. The dark-haired man in an outdated brown jacket must be the canid's handler. Slap one of those silly hats on him and he would look like an ancient detective from the old noir movies. The handler was stooping over Sue and reattaching her head. Another pang of anger coursed through Amy. Who gave that bastard the right to touch one of her toys? If either the canid or its handler were in reach, she would have bitten them. But, sadly, the wolfman had a firm grasp on her, ensuring she could not move. Feeling better there, miss? The handler asked the android in a gruff businesslike voice. Amy's mind tickled as her mind reading brought about a flood of information from the handler. Mind reading wasn't magical, even if Amy had made more than a few people think it was. Mind reading was an art. An art of looking at a mess of fine electrical impulses of trillions of synapses firing simultaneously to form patterns. Patterns that she could interpret, but interpretations weren't always that accurate, which is why it was an art. The better she knew someone, the more nuanced and accurate the interpretations would be. Luckily for her, there were some patterns that were generally similar. Like the pattern that the stubbly stranger thought at that moment. It was an extremely common one: he liked Sue. "You are sweet on her, aren't you, boss?" Gerald said, grinning. Amy grimaced at his words. Trust the overgrown puppy's instincts to arrive at the same conclusion as her far superior mind-reading ability. The handler scoffed, sounding annoyed. "Best be quiet there, Gerald. My finger might accidentally slip onto the button." The pair were the typical canid and handler duo, Amy mused. They hated each other's guts, but were forced to work together, so the hate turned into a kind of tolerance. But what other insecurities could she work on to get herself out of this mess? Empty threats don't work on me, Gerald chuckled, showing his canines that were much too close to Amy for her comfort. Amy sensed that laugh increasing the handler's annoyance, though outwardly he hid it well. It was time for Amy to take action. The android was still sitting on the floor at the foot of the bed and thinking very confused and chaotic thoughts. Amy believed it must be the sudden return to reality that had set Sue's mind into such a tizzy that Amy could not find a recognizable pattern other than pure confusion. She ignored Sue for now. The canid was a simple lackey. His thoughts were so simplistic that it boiled down to canid would do whatever his boss said. So Amy decided to work on the handler. "Excuse me," she said as demurely as she could while her face was pressed to the ground. "Do you mind letting me up so I can make everyone some tea? Your canid is much faster and stronger than I am, so there is no point in me struggling or running. Besides, this place is all I have and I have nowhere else to go to." There was no lie in what Amy told them, but she hoped the handler was clever enough to see the opportunity she was providing him. The true bait she was dangling in front of the handler was the very android that he found so intriguing. The handler thought for a moment, his thought patterns shifting from one to another. Suspicion? Doubt? Before they settled back on interest for Sue. Before he voiced his decision, Amy was smirking. "Yes. All right. Let her go, Gerald," the handler said flatly. The canid's jaw fell open as he stared at his partner. Patterns of confusion crisscrossed the dog boy's cortex, which made Amy smirk wider. "But see, boss," Gerald half whined, half spluttered. "Are you?" But before the canid could finish the question, the handler gave him a look. Fear spiked through the wolf boy's mind. That only proved to Amy that her choice to go after the one in charge was the correct one. The dogman had to follow the orders of his master or else. Gerald reluctantly stood up, pulling Amy to her feet before growling into her ear, "Don't try anything funny." Then letting her go. Amy gave Gerald her warmest eat Shaz smile and almost danced around him to make her way to the tiny kitchenette, her long flannel pajama top fluttering around her bare thighs. The kitchenette was more of a cupboard, just like the bathroom. All the single-room apartments were similar throughout the station. At least she wasn't living in the communal sleeping quarters. She had hated her time there with the filthy goblins, and exosuit loaders leered her every chance they got. Amy poured the tea into 4 cups and brought them back to serve her guests. She handed each one a cup before seating herself on the swivel chair as if it were a throne and crossing her legs. The only one that paid any attention to her was the dog boy that eyed her bare legs and feet. He had no chance with her, but she smiled at him anyway. "How's the tea?" she asked no one in particular. The handler had placed his own on the table and was helping Sue take a sip since her hands were shaking. Would drinking tea be soothing for an android? What if she sprung a leak? It didn't matter as long as the handler was enjoying his time with the android. The longer Amy delayed, the better her mind reading would be and more information she could pull out of these operatives' pea-brains to use against them. "Fine," Gerald said, lapping at his tea. Amy was glad the lanky brute was feeling awkward. Since canids were made for war, not tea parties, it wasn't particularly surprising. This one was watching her intently, making sure she did nothing strange. While Gerald watched her, Amy inspected him in turn. Gerald was wearing a metal collar, she noted. Amy could see the allure of a collar and made a mental note that all her pets should wear one. She realized she was getting distracted and needed the handler to think about something that he found unpleasant and hopefully damning. "Did you enjoy putting all her parts back together?" Amy's snide comment prompted a chuckle from Gerald and annoyance from Gerald's boss. "That's enough from both of you," the handler ordered smartly and turned his attention back to the calmly sipping Sue. "As I was saying, are you all right there, Miss Sue?" Despite the jeers, Harvey could not help himself and his tone became even more noticeably gentler when addressing the android. Amy wondered if he liked robots in that way or if there was something about this one specifically. A pattern about the past or nostalgia flitted over his mind. "Where am I?" Sue asked after a few sips. At least Amy's toy wasn't leaking, but confusion still raged in that electronic matrix that passed for an android brain. "Miss Sue. Your name is Sue, correct? It says so on your name tag." "I am Investigator Hardy and that is my mutt, Spot," Harvey gestured to the Wolfman. "It's Gerald, boss. My name is Gerald. Serial number GR for lower division." Gerald interjected Gerald, leaving bite marks on his cup. Amy was right. They didn't like each other all that much. "Yes?" Sue said, still confused. "What's going on?" "As I understand it," Hardy explained, "you were abducted by Miss Amy over there. She removed your head and made you play UVR with her? As an analyst android, you belong to the EIC and that counts as damaging EIC property even if you choose not to press charges under the Synthetics Act." Amy sipped from her cup, not liking the direction of the conversation. She had to redirect it somehow. Amy found it hilarious watching the android twiddle her fingers, and then pull off her own shoes to twiddle her toes to make sure they were functioning properly. "How?" Sue began. It seemed like she was going to ask something, but then she asked something else. "How did you find me?" Amy quickly jumped in to derail that conversation. "Harvey, where did you catch Gerald?" "I heard canid puppies were snatched away from their mothers directly by the handler in the most cruel of ways." Harvey's head snapped to stare at her while Gerald glared daggers, both their brains alight with remembered pain. "Jackpot. Oh. I am sorry. Is that a difficult topic for you?" She said with false concern. "It is just that I heard that many handlers get mauled by their own canid for what they did, even if it means the worst of punishments." Gerald slowly turned to face Harvey, showing his canines in a snarl while the canid crushed his cup in his hand, letting the remaining tea drip to the floor. Amy almost squirmed in her chair. Would she soon be witnessing a murder? A little mess in the apartment was a small price to pay. Gerald! Outside! Now! Harvey ordered in a strained voice. His anger had given way to sadness, Amy realized. Maybe she had misjudged their past, but that wouldn't matter if they killed each other. Harvey was busy reaching into this inner jacket pocket and Gerald was stomping towards him menacingly. This was it. This was it. But the violence that Amy anticipated never came. Dogboy stomped past his handler like an angry child right out of the apartment and slammed the door behind him. Harvey turned back to Sue, ignoring Amy. Amy wanted to throw her tea at him. I hope the dumb mutt didn't scare you. Where were we? Harvey asked the android. You wanted to know how we found you. I can't tell you what we have been working on, but we followed your tracker to its last known location in a storage room in Station Lower Level 3B. There we found a clutch of goblin eggs, but they had been crushed as if someone had stepped on them repeatedly. From there it was easy to follow the scent of crushed egg with the mutt's nose, and it led us right here. Goblin eggs let off a scent that matures over a day, making them easier to track. What's wrong, Miss Sue? Sue's visage contorted with rage, thinking pattern spiking with unadulterated rage. Sue had not shown any hint of these kinds of emotions even when her head was removed, Amy thought. So why now? Amy couldn't think what had set her off. The android swayed to her feet and stumbled forwards where Amy sat today. The android raised her fist and brought it down on Amy's head. A dull thunk reverberated through the apartment building as the android's fist slapped into Gerald's palm. Amy had not noticed his return even though the entire room was in her line of sight. He was quick. Gerald pushed Sue backwards by her hand and into Harvey's open arms. Harvey embraced the android from behind with a little too much gusto and said, I know you are angry at being abducted, but that is murder, and we can't allow that. Can't have manslaughter without laughter, Gerald joked. Amy wondered how he had gotten over his own anger in those few moments. Gerald, Harvey sighed. All right. No killing. Though it would be ruled death by appliance. Gerald, the investigator, repeated a hint of warning in his tone. Sue, caught in Harvey's arms, looked up at the handler with mixed emotions, having replaced her wrath. Sue turned her head to Amy and her thought patterns turned to uncertainty and fear. Amy was more than a little confused by that, but she still could not help but lord over the android's failed attempt at murder. Harvey jumped in with, all right, children. That is enough fun for today. It is time to bring this playdate to an end. Amy's grin slipped. She had taken too long and missed her opportunity. But maybe she could salvage it. Could we talk a little more? But everyone, even Sue, ignored her, and their patterns all showed there was nothing Amy could do to change their minds. Amy swore under her breath as she was led away to the nearest incarceration cell. 2511, Pericle Laboratory, Atlantis Station, Neptune Orbit. Bitch! The EIC corporal kicked the prone candidate in the ribs. There was no reaction. She's dead, Jimbo, the sergeant, according to his stripes, told the corporal, melted from the cells out. The corporal stood back as a part of the candid oozed out to mess on his boot. Besides her silvered hair, it was difficult to see that the body was a candid, let alone a female. Ah. Harvey. You shouldn't be here. The sergeant said sadly to the man standing over another body. A red-haired female in a lab coat, everything torn up by claws and teeth. We were close, Canterbury, the young Harvey said to the sergeant. His hand clutching the present in his pocket. One that he didn't have a chance to surprise her with. Maybe it is for the better. She was conducting these illegal experiments. Sergeant Canterbury pointed at the cages that lined one side of the laboratory. Most were empty except one that held a shivering canid cub that was no more than 5 years old. The cub was already in a collar. They said the big one was made to fill all these cages with her puppies and then watch them get cut up one by one. Canterbury, Harvey sighed, you are not helping. Hear me out, Harv. It is definitely better this way, the sergeant continued, that you found out what she was really like earlier rather than later. Sergeant Canterbury nodded to the mangled corpses of small bodies and body parts in preservation tubes. What a mess. Harvey made a noise of acknowledgement. He thought he knew Jenny. Jennifer Pericle. He had moved to Atlantis out on the edge of the civilized solar system so he could be with her. Harvey didn't know what had gutted him more. The fact that his girlfriend was dead or the fact that she had been lying to him about something like this, about gutting pups. He thought they trusted each other. He had been wrong about that. Harvey took the present out of his pocket and tossed it onto her mauled and broken body. It was an engagement ring. It was an old Earth custom, but he was old-fashioned that way. Harvey gave a wry laugh as he looked at his ex's corpse. She had been so pretty once, but now her face had been made almost unrecognizable by one of her tortured canid experiments. "I'll take him," Harvey said out loud. "Take what?" Canterbury asked, not entirely sure what Harvey was on about. "I'll take the mutt," Harvey said, pointing at the last living canid in the laboratory. "You want to be CSD?" Sergeant Canterbury asked. "Canid Security Division only takes the best as handlers. Also the pup is collared. You know that means he is nothing but trouble with discipline issues." Harvey snorted. That could mean anything from the canid being a deranged killing monster to he once looked at a guard funny. But it was true that the more difficult canids got put in the collar, just in case. "Yup," Harvey said simply. "Canterbury wasn't done. Can you really take care of a cub that watched your girlfriend torture and kill his siblings and mother? And that same cub's mother killed your girlfriend? You know that is pretty messed up." "I'll still do it." 2532, Hotel Riz, in devastation. Harvey woke up with a start. He cracked his neck loudly with a groan and sat up from where he had been sleeping on the couch. He was getting too old for this and his body was protesting. Harvey checked the time. Only 2 hours of sleep. One truth he had learnt in his career was that you got sleep when and wherever you could, there was no telling when you would have to go without. So when the leads for the investigation began to dry up, he organized a room in the nearest hotel. The hotel was better than the CSD quarters that always smelt of wet dog. Though he wanted to punch the robot receptionist when they said anonymity guaranteed, as if they were insinuating Harvey was up to no good. He turned uncomfortably in his seat and saw Gerald bouncing on the bed for no apparent reason. Where the mutt got all that energy from was beyond Harvey. "That dream again, boss?" Gerald asked as he jumped from the bed and squatted on the chair next to Harvey. "We have seen some nasty shaz together, but you only dream of that one." "Shut up, mutt," Harvey grouched. Harvey had passed out on the couch as soon as they arrived and was regretting it, but not as much as regretting telling the mutt about his dream. "It's called a nightmare, and I have little say when it decides to replay the past horrors of my life. Now shut your yap while I check my AR messages." "Speaking of AR, have you been using my AR to order proteins again?" Gerald remained silent, but at a look from Harvey answered, "You said I should shut up," he said carkily while managing to appear both guilty and amused simultaneously. "I'll take that as a yes. That explains all the spam for enlargements and hair remover. Is it because you broke the heavy-duty shaver? Have you been itching for a new one?" "You got me." Gerald threw his clawed hands up in the air. "I like not having a hairy back. It gets itchy." "Wouldn't be itchy if you shaved it correctly," Harvey muttered and shifted in his seat, turning his back to Gerald and thinking about the recent events. Miss Sue had been taken to the analysis division and Miss Amy had been sent to one of the many EIC correctional stations. The murders still weren't solved, but they had halted when Miss Amy was arrested, so there may have been a connection. His gut told him that Miss Amy knew more than she was telling, but she clammed up after they left her apartment and threw her in the holding cell. If looks could kill, Miss Amy would have killed them all twice over. Harvey idly scrolled through the news delivered to him on his AR. The usual bullshit headlines like the Synthetic Consortium once again denying EIC access to UVR server information, despite the EIC accusing the consortium of harboring fugitives related to terrorist actions on Endeavour Station. The mention of something wrong on Endeavour gave him the vague feeling he should be investigating it, but it wasn't assigned to him and it wasn't his problem. Sticking your nose in places it didn't belong only brought trouble. His own investigation was running dry, which meant he may have to visit him, which Harvey was delaying for as long as possible. The next message that popped up on Harvey's AR was an invitation to attend a function as a guest instead of an extra security detail, which was unusual. The upper management rarely wanted to see the dregs of EIC, even specialized dregs like himself and Gerald, in their fancy soirees. The text read the ceremony commemorating 25 years of service for Captain Rayner and his promotion to Rear Admiral. Harvey rejected the invitation immediately. He wasn't interested and doubted Gerald would like it either. Harvey glanced at Gerald over his shoulder. The Canid was back on the bed again and appeared to be meditating with eyes closed, but Harvey knew from the twitch of Gerald's wolf ears that he was alert and ready to pounce despite his relaxed posture. If you can call sitting on your haunches relaxed. Harvey had raised Gerald since the pup was 5 sol cycles old and hadn't known what to do with the wolf boy in the beginning. Clothes were standard issue, medicines and training were prescribed, but he had to administer them himself. Food was easy as the Canid ate almost anything, even some things he wasn't supposed to. Physically, the wolf boy was in top condition, and Harvey didn't pay much attention to the mental side, trusting it would sort itself out. It had worked for Harvey, after all. Gerald was surprisingly well behaved, doing exactly as Harvey told him, especially after being told both their lives depended on it. Harvey had heard there were problem Canids that needed discipline, but thinking about it now, he considered himself lucky that he didn't have to go through that. Maybe it was when he sent Gerald to the Canid stud farm when he came of age. Gerald's tail wagged for days afterward, only succeeding in reminding Harvey that he had had no girlfriend since Jenny. Not that he had time for such things. Harvey grunted with dissatisfaction, but not at his lack of romance. A message appeared on his AR that was of high priority. It didn't say who it was from, but the validations checked out. He sat up, suddenly causing Gerald to open one eye to watch him, Gerald's tail twitching in anticipation. He knew something was up, but waited patiently for Harvey to tell him. Harvey swore under his breath. "We have to visit an informant," Harvey said, his face a dark thundercloud. Gerald's tail froze. "Not the glitter?" "Yup." Harvey groaned as he stood, echoed by Gerald's groans on hearing where they were headed. "No rest for the wicked," Harvey said and gestured in the air to close the AR message that read, "Eliminate Sue nightly." Please like and comment about what you liked or disliked in the story. Subscribe if you would like to hear more. Thank you for your support.